Thanks for joining us on another episode of Beyond the Listing, where we discuss the business of real estate outside of the listing environment. I'm your host, Jeremy Madore, and today we're going to be talking about a little bit of a subsection of real estate business with our guest today. We're going to delve into some of the behind-the-scenes stuff that a lot of us don't normally encounter on a day-to-day basis, particularly if we are not buyer's agents or we aren't working with buyer clients. And so I'm really happy to be sitting today with Mark Fratoni. Mark, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and your business real quick.
My name is Mark Fratoni. I own and operate Wachusett Home Inspection. We're based out of Leominster, Massachusetts. Work a pretty wide radius around there. We serve most of Central Mass out to the Quabbin. I just don't go anywhere near the city of Boston. I have quality of life issues with traffic.
For sure. Who wants to do that?
Yeah, not me. Yeah. Some people do. And I spend most of my time looking at single family houses for buyers.
All right. Large percentage of your inspections.
Yeah. And I think that's where I can make the most impact, is helping people understand what they're buying.
Yep.
That's really what I do.
Yep. Well, I can't wait to roll up our figurative sleeves and get into this topic. I know that you and I go back a ways as far as our interactions. And I've admired how you handle and conduct yourself professionally, and I've really been looking forward to today.
Same. This is exciting. I'm looking forward to it. Like when I make a change in my life, it's the 6-month mark is when I know if it's really going to work, if it's really going to stick. That used to be jobs with me. I've had a lot of different jobs.
Okay.
And the 6-month mark is what I discovered to be like
the magical number.
Yeah. It's like when a job is going to plateau.
Okay.
And you got to decide, am I staying on this train or not?
The honeymoon wears off.
The learning curve for me. I was always interested in learning. So for me, I would take jobs just to learn things and then decide, am I going to stick with this or am I just going to go do the next thing?
That's interesting, Mark.
Yeah, that was kind of the way I educated myself. I did go to college too, but I didn't get as much out of that. I wish I did.
I understand.
I tried it twice.
Yeah. I tried it 3 times.
Good for you.
And the third one was the charm because I adopted or I enrolled in a accelerated learning program.
Oh, neat.
And that's what did it for me. And that was before I actually, formally got diagnosed with ADHD. So I didn't know like that, that was the reasoning behind why my brain wasn't clicking in a standard 101, 102, 103 level course environment. And so traditional college just wasn't working for me because it wasn't moving at a pace that my brain enjoyed. Same. And as a result, I didn't really truly absorb the information that was being given because it was being spoon-fed, and I wanted to be hit with a fire hose.
I wanted to go like this. I felt like they could have done college in about 1/4 of the time.
And that's
roughly.
what I did. So I did a 2-year program in 12 months flat. Awesome. And it was every month was a new set of, I want to say it was 4 classes, 5. It was either 4 or 5 classes. So every month, was a new set of 5 classes.
That's intense.
And those classes only lasted 1 month, but in that 1 month period, like you were in that class 2 hours per day, 5 days per week, and you were essentially just kind of rotating between those classes that you had. And the homework load was no slouch either. And so it was just you literally ate, slept, and breathed college.
Where did you come across this model? I don't remember it being made available to me.
It's not commonly available. The place that I went was Full Sail University down in Florida, and it's just outside of Orlando. And primarily it's a game design and programming, audio engineering, film school. So it covers the creative arts, essentially is what it does. And lo and behold, I actually went for computer game programming and design. And I'm doing none of that right now. But I'm seeing programming take place. I can talk those languages pretty well as far as like, the general concept and the hierarchy kind of stuff. Yep. But primarily the creative element of it was actually what really got my attention the most. And while I was taking on the program, I started doing more and more graphic design work and photography, which ended up being my career path from there, which is kind of how I got to this. But if it wasn't for that college, I'm not sure that I would have actually graduated with a degree.
Yeah.
I would have just been like a 3-time starter of not finishing something.
I understand that. I think the only reason I finished college both times was because I said I would.
Yeah.
I think that's the only reason I actually followed through with it.
That's fair.
I didn't want to not finish something I started.
Sure.
But it wasn't because it was highly motivating to finish.
Okay.
Or I really thought,
It's
wow,
'cause your
is this going to change my life?
Yeah.
Neither of those felt that way.
Where'd you go?
I went to community colleges locally twice. So I did Mount Wachusett Community College. My first degree was in automotive technology.
Okay.
So it's part academic, part in a shop. This is a good segue like into how my brain works, which is I want to understand how things work. Sure. It's kind of what got me into home inspections because I did that with cars when I was younger. I started tinkering with them, then I started fixing them, then I started flipping them, and then I went to school for it, and then I worked in a shop until I got to the plateau that I was referring to, like where I just felt like, okay, I kind of got what I wanted out of this. Okay. I understand how they work.
It ran its course.
But do I want to do this for the rest of my life?
Okay.
Hell no. I don't want to fix cars the rest of my life. So the second degree, I went back in my 30s to Quinsig. I kind of had to start fresh in a way.
Yeah. Especially with that kind of break.
It's a long break, and I didn't remember any of the math.
So, okay, fair.
I basically did all the maths at Quinsig and then transferred to U Lowell. And I was originally going to do an engineering degree. Oh. But somewhere during that, I just realized the way they think about this, it just doesn't match well. Like I saw a kid next to me. We were doing physics, and he was enjoying manipulating calculus to solve a physics problem. And I looked over, and that clicked. I was just like, that's the guy that should actually do this for a living. Mm-hmm. I wasn't sure why I wanted an engineering degree. I just thought it'd be a good fit because I like how stuff works.
Sure.
Then I changed over to business because I like that too. But to be honest with you, like engineering was really intense and it didn't really necessarily jive well with how my brain's wired. And then business school was actually it's too much of an overview. It's not specialized enough. So I finished it, but I didn't really feel
broad
like
topic.
Yeah, it's really broad.
Yeah.
And I feel like it teaches me wanting to go into small business. It taught me nothing about that.
Sure. It taught you the inner workings of a corporate structure.
Very much so.
Right. High level kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the how-tos, but the broad concept or the generalization of what you should be able to do in a larger scale model. Yeah,
I think it helps you communicate. If you're going to work in a big business, it would help you understand what accountants do, what finance people do, what marketing people do, what sales people do. So you could either manage that or pick a specialty role. But for me, I'd already had quite a bit of real world experience at that point.
Right.
And none of it was in large corporations. So a lot of it was just like, okay.
Have you ever worked in corporate America?
No, I've always worked in small businesses, other people's small businesses for the most part.
Yeah.
I was never attracted to that, even though I had access to it. My father worked in large corporations and he was very successful. And I think he had trouble wrapping his head around why I had no interest.
Sure.
Especially after getting a business degree.
Yeah.
He was just about on his way out, retiring. And
he's like, you're primed for this. Like, this is perfect.
And I took one look in that building, that sea of gray cubicles with people running down the aisles with their laptops and not looking at each other and frantic. And I'm like,
which can only be described as worse today, probably.
Yeah. I don't know because I don't set foot in those places.
Right, neither do I.
It was very unattractive to me. Because I'm not just financially motivated. I think if it was purely financial for me, sure, you can make a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a cost benefit though, right? Like, what do you trade in? What are you sacrificing in trade for that?
A lot, in my mind.
So, and that brings us to you and your business. I mean, you are a team of one. Do you have a few people working with you?
Just me.
Just you. Okay.
Yeah.
So you handle all your appointment scheduling and A to Z.
I rely on software for the things that a human could do, but this human doesn't want to do. I rely a lot on
I rely on other
software.
people who also rely on software. But
They make some really, there's one company, Spectora, that makes very good, fully integrated home inspection software. That's all they do.
Got it.
They've got a large team. They keep up with the latest devices. So I never feel stranded with the electronic side of my business. It's just, I can do online scheduling, which people love. I can direct people to an effective website that answers most of their questions. So I don't need to spend a lot of time on the phone. They can schedule, I can send them agreements through that. They can sign the agreements online. You know, like there's just so much
one-stop shop.
Yeah. It just simplifies, and people appreciate that. It's not like people are, forgive me, I forgot to shut my phone off.
You're doing better than most because you didn't take it out.
Oh,
Put it on the table right here.
I would leave it at home if I could, but that's probably not going to happen. I rely on it too much.
I get that.
But you can run a business on one of these.
You can.
That's what's amazing about good software.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
So yeah, it's just me. I've thought about growing. I just don't think, I think there's businesses that are really good for scaling. And I think there's businesses that are not necessarily meant for that.
I agree with you.
Do you?
I do.
I feel like a lot of business people would, like, they tell me, well, all you own is your job. I'm like, that's fine with me right now.
I agree with that statement as well. Yeah. However, if that is your desire, then you're doing the right thing.
Exactly.
Right? There's no wrong way there's wrong way of trying to grow companies, period. Like there is a right way and a wrong way in regards to how to scale. But I don't think that there's a wrong decision in regards to either choosing to or not to scale something.
That's a good way to put it.
I think anything, if looked at in the right light, can be scalable. That doesn't mean that it should be scalable, right? Boutique photography is one of those things that are kind of on that gray area.
Yep.
It depends on what you do. I think that you can scale certain segments of photography. I do not believe that all photography is scalable, which is why, like, art-driven photography, for example, is not something that I define as a scalable model in regards to number of people working in one agency. You can hire multiple photographers that have great artistic eyes, but the thing about art is that it's so interpretive or so subjective that what one individual might enjoy or do or really thrive in may not translate at all to the next person that you hire that you thought shared the same vision, right? That's a disaster for business if it's not managed or packaged properly, right? If you're scaling a model where you're now instead just simply managing a bunch of photographers who have great artistic visions of their own, that's a scalable model.
Yeah.
But trying to grow one artistic vision amongst a bunch of photographers is much more challenging than, say, producing a product that's not art driven, right?
100%.
Back to the engineering conversation, if you would, right? And so real estate photography is like on that weird cusp of art/product.
Yeah.
And I think that in many cases, the art of real estate photography is more in the client interaction than it is in the photograph. Which you can scale client interaction. I don't think that you can scale the art of photography as well as you can scale the customer service side of photography. Does that make sense?
It makes 100%, like a lot of sense. Yeah.
And so that's where we are, right? And I also respect those who really hold their art side of photography for real estate or architecture in general so dear to them that they refuse to scale it.
Yeah.
All the more power. Go for it.
Yep.
For them, what they will do is they will scale their pricing, not scale their business, right? So that's how they build in their own cost of living, lifestyle, all the kind of stuff, right? Because there's only so many hours in the day that you can actually produce work,
right?
Particularly in our field.
Yep.
And you and I share a lot of those parallels. The amount of waking hours that you have is finite.
Correct.
And that is your limitation. You don't have a teleportation device, so your travel time.
How do you know I don't?
This just in. If you do, please.
I do not.
We can work out an exclusivity.
You were correct in your assumption.
lacking a teleportation device, we have to build in the cost and time of transportation to and from properties, which is an additional limiting factor. Therefore, more greatly impacting the scalability of the model, and putting a larger cap on our time available. Right. So for us, the choice to grow from a regional perspective was a no-brainer, due to the fact that getting from here to, say, the Merrimack Valley, that's a real time consumption. You're going to spend an hour each way.
Right.
You're not getting that back, not unless you really raise your rates to the point where it becomes worth your while to do so. But the amount of business that you could leave on the table by not having the time available because of the amount of time that you're spending in commuting, that's a real threat to your business growth. And so those are all dynamics that you have to really consider when you're looking at scalability of any model at all. And then, going from one person to two is probably the biggest leap that anybody can make. It's like having no kids and then having a child.
Right.
All right.
It
Great.
fundamentally changes your life.
It fundamentally changes your life. But then you go from 1 to 2 and you're like, okay, all right. I think I got this. Yeah. And then you go from 2 to 3, you're like, I don't got this anymore, because now you're outnumbered, right? So it's that whole premise. It's the same thing with employees, and company size and growth like that. But
that makes sense.
So that's my angle on that. Yeah. And I definitely applaud those who make the conscious decision to remain a one-person individual, a one-man show. People who do it accidentally, not so admirable, because some people just don't know how. They want to, or they dream of scaling, but they don't have their legs about them to do it. And for those people, I would recommend, tutelage. I would recommend some sort of guidance counseling for business coaching and things like that to help, really galvanize that scalability. But people who choose to remain just a one-person shop, I definitely applaud them. All that to say that
that's good to hear.
So
I think you really get it. I think some folks are just about big. Bigger is always better.
Right.
And I don't agree with that thinking. Yep. I think there is opportunity. I could grow this business, but do I want to? Like, for where my life is at right now, I have young kids.
You have two?
I have two girls.
Two girls.
And they're 9 and 5. And I'm not missing that.
Right.
I have a lot of control over my schedule, over my life in general, with the way this business operates. And I'm able to operate at a really high level as far as, like, I schedule, for example, I only schedule inspections when I'm during my highest period of focus during the day. Like, who has that option? I like having that option. I like to say, look, this is when I am best, and that is when you want me, not when I'm falling off at 3:00 in the afternoon, and even a cup of coffee ain't gonna fix it. That's not when you want me on site. Being able to do things like that, to just really kind of hyper focus in on just.
You're consciously doing this?
Yeah. I love being able to do that. I love being able to engineer my life. And that's one of the things about owning your job allows you to do.
Yep.
You can really hone in on what makes you as an operator effective. And some people notice. I don't expect everybody to notice these things. Like, it's not for somebody else except for the client. If the client has a great experience, that's all that matters. Like, it's an important service that we do, right? So that's at the helm. That's at the front of this thinking, is like, if we screw up, it has large implications for people. So they're relying on us, but they're also relying on what you described as that customer interaction. If I'm not present, if I'm not focused, if I'm not available to really explain a thing effectively in a non-inflammatory way, like, buyers are inherently nervous. They don't need me
to go pushing red buttons.
Yeah, like, I don't need to be yelling problems at them, all caps.
Sure.
That's not how I need to be talking to people, because the problem is enough.
Yeah.
I don't need to be part of the problem. So I just feel like if we're conscious about how we live our life in general, it affects the effect we have on people, right? So being able to engineer all that is really fun. It's really enjoyable. It's really fulfilling. And you get the feedback to show, because people will tell you, if you're screwing it up, they'll let you know.
If you're listening.
Yeah. If you're open to that, right? Like you have to be paying attention to feedback.
You have to be receptive. But you also have to process it in a way where it becomes an action item for you to grow with or change in yourself, in your approach. I mean, obviously if you're demonstrating that there's a challenge with this particular part of the structure or whatever, and the way that their body language is coming back to you,
right.
You have to really real time assess that, don't you?
You have to be tuned in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you got to be tuned in doing your job, finding the problems with the house.
Yeah.
You also have to be tuned into what their body language is, what they're feeling, even what you might call a vibe, because you can feel it. Mm-hmm. You can feel it when someone's got I'm an electrical panel and my back is to the client, but you can feel a heaviness come across the room sometimes when you say a certain thing. Yeah. So it's like, I just feel like if you're not tuned in, you're going to miss all those cues.
Yeah, for sure.
So if I'm cramming in more inspections than I'm capable of doing, overbooking myself to make more money, for example, is a common theme, even for one-man operations. Yeah. Regardless of scalability, I just know this is a thing that people do. And this comes back to, again, I feel like if you back out, if you zoom out and you go, well, what's driving a person to do more work than they know they can handle appropriately? Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that comes back to just, again, how are you living? Mm-hmm. What are your finances like? Sure. Are you so over leveraged that the minute your business slows down a little bit, you're panicking? Yep. So the next time that you have an opportunity to work, you're taking it no matter what. Right. So now you're doing 3 inspections a day. Right. And you're burnt out and you're a grumpy mess. And it's like, it's not a good way to live. No. In my opinion. No, I agree. And I want to say from a fact-driven standpoint, it's not a good way to live. I don't think it's necessarily an opinion-driven standpoint. And the reason why I would go out on a limb and say that is long-term, it is unsustainable to live like that. It might be fine in a pinch where, you know what, I made some mistakes. I'm trying to catch up from making those mistakes. I have awareness of those mistakes. I'm going to consciously not make similar mistakes in the future. And therefore I'm going to hustle like heck for the next 2 years to get out of this mistake-driven society that I've, become a part of or whatever. Created or fallen into, Right. And a lot of people fall into that mindset. I don't think that, I would describe that more of a poor mindset. Yeah. Is what I would label that as. Because you're operating from a space of being without something. Scarcity. The scarcity mindset. And because of that, it's driving you to behave or think in a way that is just constantly going back to the well for more time, more energy, more resources, more everything, instead of understanding that your well has a leak in it and you need to fix that instead of trying to fill it up faster. And what's interesting is the pattern of this. I know a lot of people, this is not uncommon for someone's lifestyle to just keep elevating as their income. Yeah, exactly. So they're always in this situation. Yeah. Whereas if you kind of just keep it scaled back and say, look, I drive crappy cars on purpose. Because they don't cost anything. Mm-hmm. They're so cheap to run, to buy. Mm-hmm. And I drive them into the ground. And it's like, would I love a new Tahoe? Sure. Who wouldn't? But again, it would force me into a situation that I don't want. So I drive crappy cars. Yep. I'm okay with that. I'm very much at peace with that. It makes me smile every time my car starts. The little things in life. Sure. Because a lot of things have to happen for that thing to start every day. Yeah. Right. But so you've made yourself available of that knowledge, right? I do have an advantage there where I can. You do. Yeah. But you didn't get put there by somebody. No, it was created, but. Right. Fair enough. So take ownership of that is what my recommendation is. Fair enough. It didn't fall in your lap. You embraced the opportunity because you sought it out. Yeah.
So you made yourself aware. Now, not everybody can make themselves aware of how to fix their own, vehicle problems, right? Sometimes people are this beyond them, or it just seems too overwhelming, too complicated, right? And that's fair. But there's other areas in your life that you can make similar choices that allows the freedom of capital to get moved
100%.
Toward the maintenance of an older vehicle.
Yes, maybe an old vehicle wasn't a great example for all the aforementioned reasons.
I think I think
it's one example in my life.
Well, that's the thing.
Where it's like
I think everybody can sympathize with vehicle maintenance, regardless of the age of the vehicle.
I would think so.
What's that?
I would think so.
Yeah, it's a necessary tool, right? Yeah. But it's when we treat it as more than a tool that it starts to take over and pilot us versus us piloting it.
I like that. That's
right?
a good analogy. Yeah.
And it sounds to me like you're consciously making these choices through your whole life, so that you can design for yourself a career path that is a sustainable one and not driven by the need to scale. Correct. Or the need to take on too many jobs, or the need to jack your rates because of a series of errors or omissions or mistakes that you've made in your own personal life decisions.
Yep.
So
it's all connected.
Yeah, it is.
It really is. And I was lucky enough to grow up with parents who lived a fairly frugal existence, even though they made a good living. So I had a good example. Mm-hmm. I didn't always follow that example. Mm-hmm. I had to learn everything the hard way. That's mm-hmm. just how I'm wired. Those are the lessons that stick, the ones that hurt. They are. So I still had to fall on my face, but at least I had the wiring in my brain to fall back on. But anybody can learn that stuff. The books are out there. The knowledge is out there. The podcasts are out there. There's a lot of good people teaching other people how to live frugally, but happy. Like, sure. I think that's the disconnect is I think a lot of people think frugality equals misery because you're not allowing yourself certain things, but in reality, you're allowing yourself a lot of freedom, and that's where the good stuff is.
It takes a while to realize that, though.
It does.
So to go from a life of maxed out living to go to frugality or minimalism, and I don't mean minimalism from a design standpoint. Obviously, it's more from a do I need that type of thing. It's a shock to the system because you're like, how does anybody live? Many people live and can live in a very frugal or conscientious way that doesn't allow for discretionary spending to occur every single day. Right? They plan their purchases. They're less impulsive. They are more thoughtful in both what they're purchasing for themselves or their families, or even gift giving to others. They're not giving meaningless stuff. They're not gathering things just for that sense of security and safety that we love to have when we have the latest and greatest of something, right?
Right.
When you go and buy a used vehicle that has 75,000 miles on it.
Oh, that's brand new.
Right?
What are you talking about?
That's exactly my point, right? That's my point. The only time that we've ever purchased a new vehicle in my family is for our family vehicle for my wife 7 years ago.
Yep.
And it's still running just fine. It's got 115,000 miles on it, a Honda Pilot.
Oh, it's just getting going.
It's just getting going. Exactly. Right. So it being a Honda, it's got many miles to go.
100%.
Maine winters are a whole other story with salt and stuff like that, but whatever, the body's probably going to fail before the engine does. But the goal with that was that we literally bought a brand new vehicle. It had 100 miles on it because it had been driven from another dealership. And it was the last model of that model year series. Mm-hmm. So it was a 2015 Honda Pilot, and in 2016 they came up with a whole new body style.
Yep.
And so it was literally like one of those clearance items, like get it off my lot because it doesn't represent what Honda is anymore. And it was a base model Pilot, like and we got it for like a whopping $27,000.
That's amazing.
When the next model that came out was already at 37, right? And we've driven it, and it's not had a vehicle loan on it for 4 years now, and it's going to survive for a long time.
That's the key. The no loan part. It's wonderful, isn't it?
It really is.
It really is.
It truly is.
It frees you up to do other stuff.
It does.
Do you have any hobbies, for example?
Yeah, I do. We love boating.
Cool.
Boating is a hobby of mine. We are also on our way with the girls to start creating their own investment portfolios. which is exciting in its own weird way, because it has nothing to do with, my wife and I's finances. It has to do with, where would we like to benefit our kids long term. And so right now we're in the process of building an Airbnb next to our house on its own parcel.
Very cool.
And the intention, and I've talked to my wife about this, and our intention is to have one rental unit per child, so that when we retire or when we pass on, that they each inherit a property that has a residual income to it. And whether or not they choose to sell it or whatever, that's up to them.
Yep.
But we have the resources to build these homes ourselves. I'm literally building it with my brother.
Great.
And minus electrical work. You'd be happy to know that.
Hey, I'm all for people doing their own work.
Right.
As long as it's correct.
Yeah, as long as it's
Doesn't
correct.
matter to me.
Exactly. So, the hobby for me, especially lately, is setting our kids up for a life that we were never educated on. And not necessarily like catching mistakes that they're not yet made, but more along the lines of getting them on a path where they're able to learn how to rebound from mistake making at an earlier age versus having to fall flat on their faces and not have anybody there to help them.
So
Does that make sense?
the idea makes sense. I'm not sure how I'm trying to think of how somebody could have possibly taught me that. What is the method of teaching that?
By showing them the mistakes that we're making actively.
Okay. Yeah, we do that too then.
Right? No,
I think owning, So you're vulnerable with your kids.
Yeah.
Like you show them that
Totally.
we're just human.
Totally.
We mess up. And like this goes back to like people who don't apologize to their kids. I don't think it's like if I say something to my kids that was completely like inappropriate, yelled at them for something that didn't even do or whatever, yelled at them in general. Like if I feel like I didn't need to do that and I apologize for it, I don't think that's a weakness.
No.
I think it's showing your kid that you're just a human being.
Yep.
You make mistakes and then you walk them back. You apologize. You do what you got to do to fix it and you move on.
Yeah. I didn't even realize that I was doing that. I got called out by somebody. We're at the town office, and I can't remember if I was re-registering a vehicle or getting a dump permit or whatever. It doesn't matter. But I was at the registrar, and we were doing our business, and there was a line behind me, and I had our third child with us, Gabrielle, and it's just her and I, and she pointed something out, and I just kind of dismissed him like, no, I don't think that's right. And then come to find out, she was in fact correct in what she had said. And so I realized that right there. And I said, Gabby, I am sorry. I told you that you were wrong and you're actually correct.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's all I did. Right. I moved on with my day.
Yeah.
I leave the line and I'm heading out. And the woman at the back of the line who had overheard stops me. She goes, can I just tell you how much of an awesome job you're doing as a parent? That's awesome. She goes, if more fathers, and mothers for that matter, apologize to their kids when they were just simply wrong about simple things. Because if you're apologizing for something simple, you darn well know that you're apologizing for the more complicated.
That's what you're modeling,
right? Exactly. Yeah. And so I wasn't realizing that I was actively doing that, not intentionally. Like it's just in my blood to own a mistake that I've made and apologize for the mistake to the person that I made it against or with.
Yep.
Right. And that's hard. It's hard because it requires humility.
Right.
And
I wasn't always good at this.
Yeah.
This is something exactly. I would credit my wife with teaching me.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. I didn't understand how to apologize to people.
Okay.
I didn't get it for a long time. I would just hold in all the things I did wrong. Oh. It took me a long time to understand how to relate to people better.
What was the turning point?
Probably having kids, really.
Okay.
Because they're mirrors. They showed me in their behavior what my crappy behavior was. And I'm like,
I don't like that.
Now, granted, Marissa, my wife, had been working on some of these things for years, and I just wasn't listening because I was too stubborn.
Got it.
So she gets credit there too. But I mean, life in general, there are moments in life where even when I was a kid and teachers, aides, I went to public school and they would just yell at us and tell us that things were just the way they are because they're adults and we have to respect them. And it's like, well, what you're saying doesn't make any sense. So if you can tell me why, I'll listen.
Because
But
I said so.
Not because you're an authority.
Right.
You know, like that never sat well with me.
No.
So I think once it clicked in my own brain that if we just have a little humility
Yeah.
and just either take the time to explain something
Right.
or admit when we're wrong, that's okay.
Yeah.
It's not going to hurt anybody. Matter of fact, it's going to help the kid who's really confused.
Yeah.
Like, why is this person yelling at me?
Yeah.
It's okay to clarify these things. And like you said, I think the long-term benefit there, what you're doing with your kids is going to be huge. That's really important.
Yeah. And if that's what you're doing with your kids in regards to consciously looking at those interactions, you're building adults that are really going to embody, hopefully, and obviously that's a choice for them, right?
Yeah.
But they have at least a model to go after in regards to owning one's own responsibility, being able to process effectively the reasoning and the logic behind the decision making that you're presenting to them. But if you do that in an authoritarian, because I said so kind of format, which is what my parents did, you have nothing to go off of for logic and reasoning. You're just driven by rule of law. And if you don't understand the rule of law or as to like where the decision came from or the spirit that it came from, or what went through their heads to arrive at that choice,
Right.
then you're really out in left field wondering how they arrived at that conclusion and having to assemble it from scratch. And as a child, you don't have the tools to do that.
Right.
So you get into adulthood thinking that the way that your parents did it must be the right way, and therefore you're just going to regurgitate what they did. Whereas parents who are thinking things through live with their kids nearby, while it's a real drag because they get to, they think that they can butt in on every conversation. Right. And so that's like a dynamic that we're still trying to figure out.
Same.
Right. Because you have the conversation near them or even in front of them about, a decision that you're trying to make as a couple. And then they think that they have a vote. They don't get a vote, right? But they think that they have one because you give them a vote in smaller things. They think that the larger thing is also inherently something that they can vote on.
Our kids still think everything we're talking about that's adult is boring, so we're lucky there.
Yeah.
They don't want to listen to us. But they are listening.
How old are they?
9 and 5.
Okay, yeah.
So,
all right.
yeah.
Our 9-year-old's starting to get involved.
Really?
But our 2 teenagers are like, they're thick as thieves when it comes to family conversations or what they perceive as family conversations.
Sure.
They're actually couples conversations, right? And my parents had a workaround for that, and that was they spoke French.
Oh, that's brilliant.
It wasn't because I don't know French. And they never taught us French because it was a secret language that they were using. They didn't want to pass it on, partly because of the embarrassment associated with their own childhoods and knowing French. Because growing up in a Franco-American community in Maine, it was one of those things where you didn't want to show all your cards that you were an immigrant because, if you didn't know English as your first language, then you must be a foreigner kind of thing. And you must be therefore, poor and dumb and blah, 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 all the other stereotypes that got associated with it. So they grew up in an environment where it was frowned upon to use French outside the home because it was hush hush kind of thing. And so when it came to having kids, my parents just chose to use it as a secret language, and they never taught us. So that was the double-edged sword. On the other hand, they also had the ability to have private conversations right in the middle of everybody.
That must be pretty sweet.
I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
It was aggravating as a child because you're like, I want to know what mom and dad are talking about for no other reason than just being aware of what's going on,
right.
Just from a predictability standpoint and stuff like that. But on the other hand, we didn't obviously inherently get a vote on anything because we didn't even know what was being voted on.
Right.
Right. And so they could have had, I doubt it, but they could have had completely, knock down, drag out arguments calmly in French, and we wouldn't have known. Right. That didn't happen. Right. My parents were definitely like, more vocal than that. So we knew when a fight was happening, but when it came to like all those decision-making things, we missed out on all of that. And so, being an adult, you have to learn that from scratch, and you're doing it live. You're doing it live in front of your spouse. Sometimes you're doing it live in front of your customers because you're making mistakes real time and you don't know it. And they're, kind of slapping you in a good way, early on, especially. Right.
Sure.
So those are all building blocks of of how life and business, run alongside of each other. And
They're all intertwined. And that's why I was asking about hobbies, because I think they're actually important.
What do you do?
Woodworking is probably my main hobby at the moment.
Yeah.
But they're just like jobs for me, where I will get obsessed with something. I'll go deep. I'll learn it. Look, it's a thing. But it keeps your brain learning.
Yeah.
And if you're not learning, what are you doing? So I think, again, leaving time for that.
Yep.
I know people that don't have time for hobbies. They only do one thing, and they do too much of it, in my humble opinion. All I do is work. I don't pay attention to my kids. I don't have hobbies.
Sure.
I don't have relationships.
Sure.
I just work.
Yep.
And it's like, on the surface, that looks successful. But to me, we talk about scalability. We talk about what's motivating me. To me, I want time to do all the things. Mm-hmm. And work is a component of that. And attempting to master something is a component of that. It's enjoyable. Mm-hmm. It's enjoyable to try to be really good at something, and to keep clicking away and peeling back those layers, whether it's a hobby or a profession.
How far do you go in a hobby before you're on to the next hobby?
Some of them pretty deep. Some of them get left in the way, by the wayside.
I know.
I'm getting better about just, if I'm not going to pursue it, just sell whatever was associated with it, get rid of it.
That's
you
the
got to
hard
do
one.
it. You
That's
gotta
the hard one.
Cut the leash.
My shed is so occupied with things that have just kind of gotten shelved, and I keep saying temporarily, but the truth is I don't know how long.
You can always go back, but you don't have to keep all the stuff.
That's my thought. But the stuff that you invest in order to do something even remotely well, usually has a couple grand price tag plus.
Yeah, there's implications depending on how deep you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not buying a set of golf clubs because I absolutely loathe sports almost.
Then don't ever hit a golf ball correctly, because it will hook you. It's bad.
I've done driving, and I've definitely knocked things properly.
Okay.
It's just
it didn't hook you. You're lucky.
I think for me that there's a fear, and if an audience member wants to chime in here, there's a fear of getting on the course and not knowing enough to progress through the course at a speed that's suitable for everybody involved.
Oh, don't worry. The people behind you will let you know.
Yeah, I know.
They'll start hitting golf balls at you and yelling at you.
That's the problem.
Wonderful.
That's the fear. See, you're just affirming it. That's great. This is great.
Well, it will happen. But it happens to people that have been playing for 20 years.
Okay.
Too. Because most people never get past a very low standard in golf.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter if you've been playing for 20 years. You're probably still terrible at playing golf.
You're speaking from experience here?
Partially.
I
definitely plateaued with that one. And I keep that hobby literally on the shelf. I don't have a set of clubs.
Sure.
I have a foundationally good swing that I don't use enough, so it never really gets super good.
Sure.
But I can go play around in golf and enjoy it. And depending on the season of my life, I might pick those clubs up more often. Lately, not much at all.
Sure.
A couple times a year, maybe. But instead, I'm building furniture.
All right.
I mean, it's one of those rabbit holes that there's a lot to explore.
Yeah.
And I like functional things. I like building things that are functional.
Okay.
When the projects are finished, my family likes it too.
Everyday use items?
Yeah, right now I'm just building stuff for our house. Mm-hmm. So the bunk bed that I built for the kids, it took longer than it was supposed to. Imagine that.
No, say it isn't so.
Yeah. I decided I wanted to mill all the lumber.
Oh.
I wanted.
Yeah.
It had to be all solid wood.
Sure. Of course.
Naturally. Very minimal on anything mechanical, fastener, like mostly glue joints.
Okay.
And it's just way too many of them. So I wanted, like every project, I'm sure you have a similar, I don't know, maybe you don't, but like with woodworking as an example, if I'm going to do a project, I want it to be a little harder than the last project, and I probably want it to need another tool that I don't have yet. So it's an excuse to acquire a new tool, and I have to learn at least one new skill. Yeah.
Did you purchase?
I have a feeling you'd
have you
connect on
purchased
this.
a Festool domino yet?
Not yet.
Okay, but you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, I know what you're talking
that's
about.
Good. That's fantastic. That's great.
If you got one you want to sell, just
no, I don't. That was actually one of my shopping cart items that I was waiting to check out on when I could have justified
You were that
it.
close.
I was that close.
Wow.
I was that close.
I've never gotten that close on a domino.
Yeah.
This bed had 100 mortise and tenon joints in it.
That's
Probably
an investment.
should have bought a domino.
That's an investment.
Yeah, it was dumb, is what it was. I designed it, so I could have designed it with way less joinery.
Sure. You could have been like, oh, we'll just use a bolt there.
Oh, that too.
Yeah.
It could have been all mechanical fasteners. Yep. I don't like wonky furniture. So when you push on this thing, it doesn't move.
Yep.
And that was my goal. We also have a weird size. We have a queen on the bottom and a twin on the top.
Yeah.
And it's like the kids' nest.
Sure.
Put shelving in there. Like it's dialed in. And so if you're going to do it, go all the way. That's
anything that's worth doing is worth doing well.
Do it to the nines. Yeah. So it's purple. It's for girls. So it's all painted purple.
Do they share a room?
They do. And that's another thing I'm trying to encourage as long as I can.
Yeah.
So that my wife can keep her office.
Oh, okay.
We have a 3-bedroom house.
There's all right. There's an underlying reason there.
There's a few.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of them.
Yeah. That's fun. That's good. They get along nicely currently?
They're 4 years apart. So they're not competing on the same stuff. So I think that there's less in their way as if they were 1 or 2 years apart.
Yeah. Speaking from experience, I'm going to have to say, yes, I agree.
Okay. And the older one happens to be a very sweet, sensitive, intelligent, good big sister.
Yep.
She doesn't look at her little sister like she's taking attention away from her.
Sure.
She wanted a little sister and she got one and she's happy about it. So that helps too.
Yep.
That dynamic is just lucky.
Yep.
We're just lucky to have that. But yeah, so far so good. We'll see how long that lasts.
That's good.
I don't know.
And Marissa, you said she has a home office.
Yep.
What does she do for work?
She's done entrepreneurial things. She's a writer. Mm-hmm. She's a nurse by trade, but I don't think you'll ever find her working in a hospital environment again. Neither of us are big institution kind of people. Mm-hmm. She's wired very similarly in that regard. She's been published a lot. She's been involved in research. Right now, as soon as our youngest went to kindergarten, I'm talking the day that Olivia went to kindergarten, there was a trail of dust down the street when my wife was like going to get a job.
All right.
Like a regular routine kind of job, just to get the rhythm of her life back. To some sort of norm. Yeah. Because she kind of got stuck at home with the kids. It wasn't really like by design. It was more by default.
Sure. Sorry, Jen.
It happens, right?
Yeah, it does.
And it happened to her. So she's a great mom, but I don't think that's all she wants to identify as.
Sure.
Right? Like she has her own life. She built her own career.
It can be both.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
And it is.
Yeah.
For
You're
both
a dad
of us.
and a home inspector.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like I'm more than one thing.
Yeah.
And she's definitely more than one thing.
Sure.
So she's currently working like 3 part-time gigs as a school nurse.
Okay.
Hopefully that will consolidate into one full-time school nurse.
Is she rotating
gig.
through the schools? Or
yeah, so she's got like substitute gigs in a couple schools where as needed, which is fairly often, it turns out. And then she's got in Leominster like a 2-day-a-week part-time consistent kind of thing.
On site.
Yeah, and they move her around. Mm-hmm. So they might have administrative work one day and then, well, we need you over here. Somebody called out. So she kind of floats, but she does have a sort of a set of duties as well.
Is she employed by the school department itself?
Oh, good question.
Or is there another entity that? Okay, I'm just curious. Just curious.
Yeah, it's pretty fresh.
Yeah, I wasn't sure like what the integration was or what the management system was there. I'm just overall curious. That's all.
Now I'm curious. I haven't
See?
delved into that.
Now you can go home and have some challenging questions for her.
Right.
Or at least some probing questions anyway. So,
yeah.
What does her hobbies look like? Or what do her hobbies look like?
Crocheting. She's creative, drawing. Okay. I think like a lot of us, depending on the season of her life, she may feel creative and she may not.
Okay. Ebbs and flows.
It does. I know when I'm seeing her express her creativity, she's probably in a pretty good place. I like to see that.
All right. You can gauge mental health at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like when we've both had mental health struggles.
Yeah.
And when she was depressed, she wasn't being creative. Sure. And it was a signal like, oh, okay. She's not totally firing on all cylinders here. Like, 'cause she's not inspired to make something.
Right.
Right. And I think creativity flows into so many avenues of life. It's a fair gauge. If you're not doing it, there might be a reason. But yeah, it's good to see her doing that. Our youngest is also like I love coming home and seeing her fully engaged in something creative, and she will do that independently. And that makes me smile inside a little bit. It's just like, she didn't have to be coaxed into it. She didn't have to be told to put down a device. She just wanted to draw something and went and did it. I love that. Yeah. It's a simple thing, but to me, it's a signal that there's some kind of balance in her life.
There's an inner desire that's driving her to do things consciously, not just unplug and try to veg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's not, what you just described to me is like almost like escaping.
Yeah.
When we all do it to some degree, I think.
Yeah.
There's a balance there.
Yeah.
And
it's
to
definitely
see a kid hitting that balance in this world makes me happy.
That is a happy moment.
Yeah.
That is a happy moment. Yeah. We go through seasons of electronics usage in the house. And it normally gets pretty heavy before like an error is caught, right? Like, oh, we went too far kind of thing. And it's something that can sneak up on you really easily.
Give me an example. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, you hear people talk about, the electronic babysitter, right?
Oh,
right. And so as parents, when you yourself are overtasked, overburdened, whether it be because of job responsibilities, household responsibilities, it doesn't matter, right? Whatever is on your mind weighing on you does in fact translate to your children, right? And you may not be putting your problems on them. You may not be doing that. However, your response to their needs or their desires for attention, not necessarily negative attention, but like, time primarily.
Just being present with
affection, closeness, togetherness. Your responses to all of those things are going to be heavily influenced by where you are as a mature / maybe immature adult who is trying to tread water, right? If you're not effectively, not just afloat, but if you're not effectively making headway, how can you possibly lead your children properly by engaging with them? And so you end up being like, I need some time. Yeah, go ahead and watch TV. You know what? One day, not a problem. But then it becomes a habit because you realize that, oh, I don't have to do that. It's an option as a parent. And then it creeps up on you. And so slowly. And then it pervades the household where all of a sudden you turn around and you're like, all right, I got my energy back. Where is everybody?
There's 4 devices going at once and you're like,
Mark.
Oh, wait a minute.
Yes.
Yeah,
that's exactly it. Yeah. And you're like, what? How did we get here?
Yeah.
How did we get here? Because there's this, I don't know what core root of language it's from, but it's an Asian dialect. There's something called Kaizen, which it translates to incremental change every day, large change over time, right? And that can go both ways.
Yeah.
Right? So
I love that.
It's a slippery slope, right? A little bit.
It plays into like consistency. Consistency is what makes great habits and successful people.
And breaks habits.
Yeah, like
right?
that.
And so you don't get in debt overnight. Right? It's a lifestyle.
Right.
And it's not a lifestyle decision. It's a series of micro decisions that by themselves were fairly innocuous.
Yep.
Right? They were just very, overall innocent decisions, like the choice to go out to eat and spending $125 on 2 meals with drinks, right? Well, that's fantastic if you're doing it, I don't know, once a month or once a quarter, right? If that becomes a weekly habit, now all of a sudden there needs to truly be a lifestyle that supports that without then turning into a debt driver, right? But it's very easy to make those decisions to allow that to be your slippery slope without consciously being aware that it's a slippery slope,
right?
Because you have reasons for why you should do that. Because I had a hard week. I missed my spouse. We haven't reconnected all week. Well, I don't know. Maybe you should be talking daily, maybe to reconnect so that you're not having to do once a week reconnect over an expensive meal.
Right.
It should be a more microeconomic way of approaching your marriage.
Yep.
Same thing is true for your business. Same thing is true for your kids. Same thing is true for all relationships that you engage in. So that's my soapbox on that. As far as the digital babysitter and how that ties into the health of the parents. If the parents themselves aren't consciously working their way through their day or their week or their month, how can they possibly ever expect or hope for their children to follow that model?
I don't know. I don't know where that expectation would come from if that's what you're demonstrating. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unless you get lucky. But I think we need to be more conscious than depending on luck.
Yep.
To teach our kids how to live well.
Yep.
In a fairly confusing world where things are changing really fast.
It is.
I think we still have to focus on those core principles of just what we know works for humans, how to live well. Keep it simple.
Yep.
It's not that complicated. We make it complicated. We make it hard, but
you're right.
It doesn't have to be like that.
No, it doesn't. So it's just, I'm really happy that we're having such a non-business related conversation.
Me too.
And the truth of the matter, though, is that all of these underlying principles, right? All of these ways of thinking that enrich your personal life go back into enriching how you conduct yourself in business.
Right.
Right.
That's who shows up.
That's
and does the thing.
Yep.
Right.
Does the thing. Yeah.
So
that's very poetic. Does the thing.
I try.
I'm trashing on you.
I can barely speak English. Never mind French.
You can't word today. That's what my oldest keeps saying. She's like, "Oh, words. They escape me today.
They're in here. They don't come out here so well sometimes."
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about this past year in regards to what you saw from a business standpoint. It was an interesting year.
Yeah.
We saw on our end a temporary return to 2019 operational statistics in regards to
2019. Interesting.
Pre-COVID behavior.
Yeah.
Is primarily what it was what surfaced.
Pre-COVID behavior. Every
so often. But it didn't stay consistent like that throughout the year.
Yeah.
It had its ebbs and flows. So I think that there's a gravitation from a buyer or a seller standpoint, from a client standpoint, to return to what was, as far as buyer behavior, seller behavior, marketing behavior, just general business operation principles, instead of having to operate in a way that's temporarily changed as a result of economic issues.
Right. Yeah. I agree with some of that. There's a feeling that things are somewhat normalizing, but it's been a wonky year. So it's really hard to say if that's going to stick.
Right.
We'll see next year.
Yep.
We've been up and down this year. My schedule has kind of been all over the place. The time of the year I expect to be busy, I may or may not be. The times I expect to be slow, I may or may not be.
Okay.
Nothing has been predictable.
Yep.
I've just rolled with it. That's all I can do.
You must be having a pretty decent month this month as far as busyness.
It's been steady.
Yeah. Because we had a crazy early October ourselves from a volume standpoint.
Well, so volume is part of our equation. And then we still have some lingering effects of the COVID market where people were freely waiving home inspections left and right.
Yep.
And we're still seeing, the way I word this is, it became a habit. It became a habit during negotiations to pull that club out of the bag and say, hey, there's another way to do this.
Yep.
So that one still comes out whenever it gets busy.
Sure.
So the volume goes up, but then the tactics come back.
Got it.
So I don't know when that's going to normalize. Who could say? I certainly wouldn't try to predict the future. When COVID hit, I thought it was going to destroy the real estate market. I could not have been more wrong about this.
You and me both.
So
I was
my crystal ball.
My feet got
broken.
Cold real fast.
Yeah. I thought we were, because to me we were already in a peak market condition or pretty close to it.
Yeah.
And I figured, this is the catalyst that's going to sort of
this is the
send
undoing.
us downhill again.
Yep.
Boy, was I wrong.
Yeah.
So I don't know anything.
Yeah, I know. I agree. You ask 9 different experts, you're going to get 10 different answers.
100%.
You know, and this isn't so much a question of what we see unfolding, but more along the lines of what we've experienced, right? Because I feel from a business standpoint, as well as, I mean, you and I just sat down for the past 45 minutes almost talking about dad's experience, right? Like family experiences.
Yeah.
The shared experience, in my opinion, is the biggest reason why relationships succeed. When we find alignment between business partners, spouses, friends, whatever group you're engaging in, you're more likely to experience growth and success and education because you're sharing things that you've experienced, not necessarily your goals, your hopes, and your dreams. That's the forward-thinking things, right? Mm-hmm. But nobody can really predict how that's going to go. What you can do, however, is look at how things have gone, and through the sharing of those experiences, leverage off of each other in a very positive way, so that your combined intellect will yield a higher likelihood of success in the future.
Agreed.
And so, all that to say, from this year's standpoint, what we've reflected on in the company is one of, that was interesting, but not just a question mark, but we can align that data with 2019 data. We can align these few months with 2020 data, right? Or maybe 21 is probably the better indicator. And so depending on the month and the market, but then you look at the mortgage rates, then you look at your volume. And
there's a lot of variables there.
So many variables.
Yeah.
But what you can say is we've gone through the ups and the downs. We've adjusted. We've hired the right talent. We've embarked on the right journey with clients, and we've really galvanized those relationships. And here we are, and we're primed, ready for next year, because we know that whatever next year brings, we'll adapt to that too, because we have 11 years of adapting to changing situations.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's the beauty of having been through some ups and downs, is it kind of lets you know whether you're going to be one of the businesses that gets shaken out when things get hard.
I love a good shakeup.
Yeah.
I love a good shakeup.
Yeah. I got to admit, I think it's almost like when there was flooding in Leominster, like natural disasters.
Yeah.
There's something really engaging about it, as bad as it is.
Yeah.
And I think shaking out of a market is very similar, where you kind of see what sticks and what doesn't. And that's exciting as much as it's somewhat terrifying too, because you don't want to get caught up in that and find out you're one of the businesses that aren't going to stick.
Yeah. I agree with you. From the excitement standpoint, there's something that wakes you up, because you're having to intentionally think about what you're doing and how you're doing it.
Yes.
Versus remaining on autopilot.
Yes.
Right. It's like you have to relearn your job today.
You can't be on cruise control.
Right.
When things are changing that fast.
Okay. On that note, how do you remain plugged into a home inspection? You talked about scheduling your home inspections so that it's taking place at the time of day that's truly best for you in regards to your own activity. Other than that, how else do you remain plugged in and engaged during a home inspection environment?
Great question. Literally everything we just talked about.
Yeah.
So for me, it's about training. So I'm always learning. It's about being efficient, so that I know that I'm not wasting anybody's time. And the more confident I get that I'm not wasting any time that I don't have to, I know people are going to appreciate that.
Sure.
So I think it's like this big onion that comes together and says, look, when I show up, people know what to expect because I'm consistent. I do the same type of thing and act the same way and engage the same way. And everything I'm doing in my life is attempting to make that happen.
Sure.
Because I don't want to be this way one day and this way the next day. Then
right.
nobody knows what to expect out of me.
You're applying an agreed upon system or framework to each and every interaction, but you're responsive to the changing elements within those interactions.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of that comes down to building relationships.
Yeah.
What are you focused on? You know, for me, when things get hard in our industry, I'm always reverting back to, am I doing a good job building relationships with people in my industry?
Yeah.
Because they're going to tell me what's going on their side of it, just like you just described. I need to know what's going on with lenders, with realtors, with everybody who's in this. What are they seeing and why is it happening? And what do I need to do to make sure that I'm offering whatever I can to help promote the way this is moving? If it's moving this way, what's my role in how this is evolving? Now, there's some things I just choose not to do. For example, one of the things we could do is sort of a quickie version of an inspection.
Yeah, like
and I just chose not to
light.
do that. Yeah, it's not how I'm geared.
Okay.
I'm not knocking the model. It's just not for me. It's just like scaling right now is not for me right now. I don't know if it ever will be in this business. I don't know that this will be my last business either. It probably won't be. I like this stuff.
You've been doing this for how long?
About 10 years.
Okay.
So 8 on my own, I think. And don't hold me to this, but that's roughly correct. Yeah. Life's a blur to me. It all kind of melts together. Yeah. But I think, there's things I'm willing to do and there's things I'm unwilling to change because I know fundamentally I'm so set on why I do it that way. I'm not changing it. And there are other things I can be flexible on. Yeah.
And those values don't shift.
They don't. I always come back to the same foundational principles that I feel serve the end user the best. Like I'm not going to change anything that's going to negatively impact the end result of somebody getting a good home inspection. That's what I'm there to do. So if it changes that, I'm not going to do it. If it can help if I can still do my job and still help people and all I have to do is maybe change a habit of mine, sure, I'll do that. That makes sense to me. I can adapt.
Okay.
But there's not a ton of wiggle room in what I do. No. It's like you're either doing it or you're not doing it.
Right.
So when I do a home inspection for informational purposes only, it's good to know. It's good when somebody tells me this is for informational purposes only, but it literally changes nothing about what I do. Yeah. I'm going to give you the same information. Yeah. What you do with it is up to you. Yeah. It's not, what am I going to do? Just tell you, well, that foundation's not failing because this is for informational purposes only. Right. It's still failing. Yeah. So,
Yeah. See, that's how your business greatly differs from ours, where if somebody were to hire us to do something for the purpose of an Airbnb rental, we shoot it entirely different than we do residential real estate for sale.
Interesting.
Entirely different. Okay. We focus on different elements of the home that we normally wouldn't embrace as much. Yep. Particularly the lifestyle element of the home, not necessarily. When we're doing MLS photo shoots, it's primarily for informational purposes only, right? Like we're showing as much information of the home as we can describe to the customer by using a lot of wide angle photography so that we can explain the layouts of the room, the placement of furniture, et cetera. Whereas if we're doing Airbnb style shoots, it's more honed in on the staging elements, how the place feels. Yes. And because you're not necessarily, you don't care so much about room connectivity.
Right.
Because you're not living there.
Yes.
You care more about the hot tub out back than you do about whether or not it's a first floor or a second floor primary bedroom.
Right. Yeah. Follow? Are there bunk beds?
Right.
Like show me the things that matter to me.
Yes.
About whether I'm not going to take my family here.
That's 100%. Exactly it.
And we do have parallels to that, I guess. They're not things that are highly variable as far as like, depending on what the market's doing, I'm going to change it. But I'll give you an example of a parallel here where if I'm inspecting a single family home for a typical buyer, which is what we're doing 95% of the time, we're going to do that with a certain lens. Like we have to take into account that a single family home buyer has a certain, they're probably already going to be nervous about what they're doing. We don't know their motivations.
Sure.
They could be getting out of a nasty relationship and they need a place to live. They could be just doing this because they want a bigger house. We don't know any of that stuff. So we have to treat them a certain way, and we have to inspect the house a certain way and explain things a certain way that jives with anybody who's buying a single family house. But if you get an investor buying a 4-family, and they're not going to live in it, we do use a different lens for that.
I understand.
And there's a different set of expectations on a multifamily building versus a single family building. I'll probably get crucified by other inspectors for saying that, because it's like, well, no, they're all the same, but they're not. You're not dealing with the same, like, investors don't treat buildings the same way that residential homeowners treat their buildings. It's very different.
It's a bottom line.
So your expectations, and you have to explain this to the client though. That's the tricky part, is if you're not explaining this to who you're working for, if you're not setting the expectation that I am going to look at this differently, and I'm going to tell you why, because I don't want to send a buyer. I'm not trying to kill deals. If I kill a deal, if my inspection ends up killing a deal, so be it. But if I don't set proper expectations, and that's why the deal got killed, because I didn't explain what the hell I was doing.
That's controllable.
That's a whole different thing.
Yeah.
That's a variable that
you
I
can't
should take
haphazardly go
responsibility
into
for.
this interaction and just do what you do without any explanation or preface or anything like that. You need to have those footnotes. You need to have those, not necessarily disclaimers, but the context in which you're providing service.
It's like a lake house. You buy a cottage from 1920 on a lake. You need context if you're buying that. And the context is, look, the house was this big in 1920. And then over 100 years, a bunch of people with a lot of beer in their belly put additions on this house. And it's like, if you understand that before we even start looking at the house,
you won't be surprised by squat.
Right.
Yeah.
You need to understand that's what you're buying.
Yep.
So if the context is correct and the mindset is correct, then you can go in and explain it better.
I love it, Mark.
Before somebody glazes over and says, oh my God, man, what are we doing here?
Sure.
Multifamily, same way. Like, look, someone's probably dying in one of these apartments.
Mark.
You got to set the stage so that, because what I don't want to do, for example, on the multifamily thing, like, let's say it's their first time investor, first house they looked at, they put an offer on, and they got it somehow, right? And now we're doing the inspection. And I don't explain, look, man, this thing was built 100 years ago, like most multifamilies in Massachusetts. And there's going to be certain things that we're kind of anticipating. If they're not there, great. Sure. If they are there, I just want to I want to make sure that person is mentally prepared for what they're about to receive.
It's most likely going to have lead paint.
So and I'm not trying to predict the future. It's more like just 100-year-old building has certain characteristics.
For sure.
And then there are other characteristics that are common to this subset of the market. So if we know that going in, I don't want someone running away screaming, and then a week later, they put the next offer in and realize they're buying the same house. Because nobody told them
it wasn't
that this
specific.
is common. If you don't say, and this is where we get tricky in my industry. Well, you can't tell people that's a common problem because you're minimizing the problem. No. I'm explaining to them that unless you're finding the unicorn amongst the multifamilies, a lot of them are going to do this, this, and this. Like, this is not uncommon to see. It doesn't make it correct. I'm not saying it's correct.
None of this is surprising, although it's not pleasant.
This is not great. I just don't want them, if you just go deadpan, this is this, this is this, this is this, this is this, this is this. And there's no context, which is, I think, how some folks think my job ought to be done. I think it's a disservice because it's not that simple. It's not that black and white. And that's not fair to somebody who's trying to figure out what the hell they're doing. You're trying to plug in. I look at buying a piece of real estate as an equation, right? So you've got the price you're paying, you've got the motivation that you have, you've got the condition of the property, which is where we come in, and we don't know any of the other stuff. So I do have to be careful not to cross that line where I'm like, trying to tell somebody what to do. I'm not trying to tell anybody what to do. No. I'm just trying to explain what they're buying and how it fits into what I see literally every day of my life.
Right. And I think that's how it probably differs from that whole informational purposes only statement, right? So if you were to do something for informational purposes only, somebody might argue that deadpan approach might actually be the approach to take because you're stripping the emotion or you're stripping the context right out of it, right? And so I guess you could probably get by with a format of service that looks a lot like that. I'm not saying to do that, but it's more along the lines of that's what information only looks like to me as as an unknowing observer.
Completely remove the human element.
Right.
Which is totally unrealistic.
It is, because every one of these transactions involves a human with an idea in their heads on what they want to be getting in the end.
Correct. And they're there.
Correct.
They're with us.
Even
That's not always true, but in our part of the country, they're with us.
Okay.
We're talking to them the whole time.
Yep.
So if you're going to have a conversation with another human being, it's good to give the conversation some context.
Yep.
And they will give you the feedback. Like, oh, I don't care about that problem. Great. Okay, we'll move on to the next problem.
Sure.
Like, that's fine. I don't need you to care. I need you to understand what it is.
Yep.
And if you're not human with people, they will shut down.
Yeah.
You can watch people in this business. If you're just throwing 30 problems at somebody, keep in mind that they love this thing that they're buying, right?
Yeah.
Most we're going back to single family homes.
Yeah.
People fall in love with houses.
Before the inspection.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they're in love with it.
It's a done deal
and
in
then
their mind.
my job is to go tell them everything that's wrong with the thing they love.
Right.
So
right.
You have to be careful with people's hearts.
Yeah.
You can't just pretend that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It does matter.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you're not going to break some hearts by explaining in no uncertain terms, like, dude, this house is a turd. Like, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So when that happens, it needs to be done appropriately too.
Right.
But
it's not you, it's me.
Trying to make a big deal out of small problems to make yourself, your ego feel better, or whatever it is that drives people to not take into account the human aspect of what we do, to me is just wrong.
Yeah.
Like, that's not right.
Yeah. In a lot of cases, the problem itself is actually fairly relative in size to what the strategy is for the individual buying it.
Right.
Right. So if somebody's mindset is such where no problem is a problem, truly, then there's no such thing as a big problem if they have the budget to afford it.
Right.
But if even the most minor problem that is north of $1,000 of repairs is a deal breaker, then you know that you're dealing with somebody who is really scraping the bottom of their budget barrel.
Right.
Right.
It's important to know.
Yep. Yeah, I get that.
Yep.
That makes sense.
And they'll tell you if you're human with them. They will tell you these things. Like, I don't ask. I don't want to know. It's none of my business.
For informational purposes only, of course.
Right.
Yeah. I feel like the informational purposes only thing might actually work better in the reverse, because the inspector themselves really needs to get a client sheet where they need to understand what demographic of client they're dealing with as far as what their goals, their dreams, their budget, their everything is. What's your capacity as a client? What's your profile, right? Because like me as a client, I don't look at any house as being too problematic to purchase. Even the ones that some people will be like, oh, that's a tear down. I'd be like, I can fix that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and that's a relative term.
Right?
Yeah.
And so obviously if you're dealing with a strategy of budgetary considerations only. So like if you're looking at bottom line, whether or not it's worth it, you know what? That's a black and white figure, right? You're going to get a couple different quotes from a couple different agencies and whatever. Sure. So that might move a little bit, but not anything more than 10%. Mm-hmm. And so if you know that the cost to purchase a Concord, teardown, quote unquote, is $600,000 or $650,000 for essentially a slightly upgraded lot of land.
Right.
But the cost to repair it is another $500 or $600 versus building something from scratch for a grand total of $950,000 to $1 million. Mm-hmm. Sure, we can have an argument as to whether or not it's worth time and effort. My restorative nature is such where I'd rather see that old building brought back than raised.
And it might be on a beautiful lot.
That's exactly.
That you can't get somewhere else.
Correct.
So that matters too.
And so it really depends on all of those other dynamics that aren't really tangible on a bottom line equation.
Yep.
In which case you bring in the clients, what their goals and their visions are. And if you marry that to the inspection as to what you're trying to seek out for information and how that information is received by them, then you have the whole client picture.
Yeah. And people can't wait to tell you that stuff. It's not like you have to ask.
No.
You just start going through the house and they will, based on the feedback you get from the person, you can tell whether they care about these problems or not.
Yep.
Great example I've always enjoyed providing is I inspected an old house in Fitchburg that the foundation was failing. It was a stone foundation and it was caving in. Like, not the whole thing.
Was it a fieldstone?
Yeah, fieldstone that had like a Homer Simpson belly on it.
Nice.
And so it's bulging. And then we get to the next area and it's literally just a pile of rocks on the ground and the framing is just hanging in the air. And it's like, I would say the vast majority of people would be really intimidated by that problem. And rightfully so. Yeah. Nobody wants to repair foundations.
No, it's not an
you don't
easy
go in
fix.
with that expectation of this single family house having
Yep.
a bad foundation. Like if nobody discloses that to you, you have no reasonable expectation of seeing that.
Sure.
So
Especially
when
if your
we're
initial walkthrough as a client.
Yeah, you're not
was
examining
not
the
in
foundation
Yeah.
in a showing typically.
Yeah. Especially crawl space stuff. That's
Exactly.
the most fun.
Nobody wants to go in there.
Shine a
But we do.
flashlight. Yeah, looks
We
good.
do, if I can fit, I'm probably going in. Again, I think that comes back to good service.
Sure.
So in this particular case, they didn't care. I was explaining that the foundation failed, and they're just, okay, whatever. And they go back to talking, and I'm like, did that land?
Yeah.
Did I not explain that well?
Sure.
So I repackaged the information and explained it again. And now they understood like that. I wasn't sure if they understood.
Sure.
Oh, no, let me just stop you. We're from a place where houses get blown away by hurricanes all the time.
Oh.
So to me, again, this is like context, right?
Yeah.
So to them, that wasn't a big problem.
Okay.
They don't care about the stupid foundation.
Yep.
They like the house. They like where it is.
Yep.
They like the price.
Yep.
You got anything worse than a failing foundation here? Not really. Okay, great.
Meanwhile, other
that's-
people would run for the hills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like,
That's awesome, Mark.
it's interesting, right? It's part of what makes the work interesting.
Yeah.
Is you get to meet all these humans on their journey doing things that are
there's
hard.
the
This
spectrum-
is very challenging
The
for them.
spectrum that you find people on.
Yeah.
You know, everything from first-time home buyers who are nervous as all hell
Mm-hmm.
to people that are experienced or have other, again, life contexts that
Yeah.
completely reframe what we consider to be problems.
Yeah.
Right.
Or they might be buying something really cool.
Right.
You know, something you get to see
Yeah.
and pick apart that, you know, like how many people get that privilege
Not
of
many.
going in and looking at a house that was built before we were a country and
Sure.
like seeing what that was made out of.
What's the oldest house that you've been in?
Nobody really knows.
Yeah,
I mean, I've
it's circa.
been in a couple
I
that
get
claim
that.
to be in the 1600s.
Sure.
I don't know because once you get past, let's say roughly the mid 1800s,
Yep.
like older than that, they're all
Yep.
built the same way. They're all timber framed.
Yep.
So they don't look a lot different.
Sure.
You can core test. I forget what they call this test, but there's actually I might want to get into this someday. Really cool. You can
Sounds like
select a certain number, like a representative sample of timbers in the house to actually drill a core
Sure.
out of it and
Yep.
send it to a lab. And they have modeled, you know, a tree, if you
Yeah.
cut it and you look at the rings, each ring not only represents a year, depending on the size of the ring, it's representing what kind of year that was.
Sure.
Was it a drought? You
Yep.
know, it's going to be a small ring.
That makes
Was
sense.
it a really luscious, wet year where the tree grew a lot? It's going to be a wider ring. Somebody has actually taken the time to model.
Based on patterning.
Yeah, based on patterning, a computer can take that core and say, oh, this is from this year. This is from 1772, because we know, you know,
We live in a glorious age.
what those rings looked like in this area. It's
Right.
regional, but
Yep.
most of your old timber framed houses
came from regional.
they took the wood from
Yep.
where it was.
Yep.
They weren't hauling it in from New York, generally speaking.
No, they
Maybe
definitely
some-
weren't shipping it overseas.
No,
Yeah.
no, they were cutting down trees on that lot
Yep.
and building a house with
Yep.
them. By the way, that was something cool. You asked about hobbies. I recently did a timber framing class.
Okay.
Hands-on.
Nice.
We built a timber frame from scratch out at the Hancock Shaker Village. So we were like, did you ever go to like one of these open air museums like Sturbridge Village?
Yeah.
And there's people doing things. Well, we were those people doing a
Nice.
thing.
So it's
we were-
hands-on. Fantastic.
it was so cool. So we're learning from masters. They don't work there. These guys actually build timber frames for a living.
I have two brothers who do that. Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So I got to do this for a week where we just start from scratch, learn the history of the buildings that are on the site and how they were built, and then start building them ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
like learning the layout, learning the trickery that goes into trying to imagine a perfect piece of timber inside of this imperfect piece of timber and how to lay out the joinery so
Mm-hmm. Sure.
it all fits together. And we got 13 different people making joints, and all this has to fit together. What about that guy over there? He doesn't look
Yep.
like he knows what he's
Trust
doing.
it.
But sure enough, it all fit together
Sure.
because the guys teaching us were really good at teaching people how to do this.
Yeah.
And it was just super cool. No power tools.
That's awesome.
Not one. So just chisels, hand saws.
This was at the
Framing
Hancock
squares.
Shaker Village, you said?
They do it once a year there.
Okay.
It's like the guys who teach it are very experienced. They've been doing that class at that location for 40 years.
I'm going to have to look that up.
You should.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
That's awesome.
If you want to geek out on timber framing, I don't know a better way to do it. There's actually another school. One of the guys who was teaching, he runs a school up in New Hampshire, closer. Forgive me, Neil. I think it's called the Heartwood School.
Okay.
I hope I got that right.
Okay.
And I hope Neil's not watching if I got it wrong. But great guy. They're running a school where they do all kinds of old world trades, including timber framing. I think that's their mainstay. So they'll teach different timber framing methods, square rule versus scribe rule, and all these old world ways of doing it. We learned scribe rule, which is the most modern timber framing method that was developed in America. It was an American innovation on medieval framing.
Okay.
So that's what I meant by, like, if you go back to a certain point, for 1,000 years, they were all framed the same way.
Sure.
They weren't trying to innovate
and then
this process.
somewhere out of nowhere, all of a sudden it changed.
Somewhere in America, somebody got the bright idea, like, you know what? We're still going to do timber framing, but I just figured out a way to make it faster and more efficient. And go figure, that happened here. Stick framing happened here too.
Yeah.
Somebody figured out we don't need to use all heavy timber and mortise and tenon joinery. We can do this with little sticks.
Yeah. And then balloon framing became a thing.
That's what developed balloon framing. So like, these are American innovations that I find really interesting. And we have all that here.
Right. You
can go in any house in Fitchburg and find the full spectrum.
See that progression.
Yeah. It's really
cool. For sure. Yeah. We have houses dating so far back that they don't have dates.
Right.
To, something but was probably closed yesterday, and the spectrum that we enjoy here in New England, and that really is primarily a East Coast New England kind of phenomenon, that we get to really enjoy and appreciate that diversity of architecture. And obviously, that also exists in England and everything like that. But from a U.S. based standpoint, it really is somewhat niche to our markets, which is really an awesome place to be. You can watch the innovation
occur. You can still see it in the framing we have here. You can literally see, this is when they figured that out. This is when they figured that out, and it got popular.
I think you're in the right job field. I mean, I think that your job field would sorely miss your expertise and your enthusiasm for the subject matter.
That. Thank you.
If ever you were to shift your focus to something else.
I don't have any attention to.
That's good.
So I'm here for a while. Anyway,
I can see why people regularly refer you to their clients and shout your praises on social media. Like you are probably one of the most tagged home inspectors that we've observed personally.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Like I don't have an objective view on that.
I would say single employed, right? Like obviously you have like large home inspection companies that have multiple home inspectors that are probably more frequently tagged. But I'd say as far as solopreneurs, you'd be the guy.
Neat.
So
that's good to know.
That's just from me to you.
That feels good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Mark, it's been really awesome to have you on. I did not expect half of what we covered to get covered today, and I'm really happy it did.
I'm really glad you had me. I admire what you're doing. I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you.
And you've always done a great job.
Thank you, Mark.
When I was an agent, I was an early adopter, an early believer in professional photography for real estate.
Yep.
And I'm really glad you ran with it because it needed to happen.
Thank you.
And apparently you were the right guy to do it.
Yeah, I think that, like I said before, it's about adapting year over year and just learning from what you've done and how to do it better. Yeah. Not too much unlike timber framing changes, right? Like we've discovered new ways of doing the things that we've been doing, more efficient ways, more technically accurate ways. And we're adopting that in real time. We now have a software development department, basically, where we're writing our own software for our company because it doesn't exist globally.
That's fantastic.
Because nobody's taken on that torch, and so who knows what's going to happen. Maybe at some point, some year, we might launch a brand that actually creates software for other real estate photography companies.
That's fantastic.
So who's to say what the future holds for us? But the best part about it is that ever learning opportunity that this business provides for us.
Yeah. So. It wouldn't be interesting otherwise, would it?
No, it satisfies my mind big time. So thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Pleasure.